So I'm not a preacher, but I've played one on TV. I've already failed at one of the first things I was going to do because I thought it would be cool to put my hair up like a TV evangelist, and this is as high as I could get it. So already I'm like not as far along as I thought I would be. So who knows what a lectionary is? Okay, you know. Okay, so what this is, it's a plan to make sure that the people in the pews hear all of the Bible. So what preachers want to do is they want to preach on the fun stuff, the interesting stuff, the stuff that's going to keep your ears. But all of the pastors have agreed that on the same Sundays they'll preach on the same scriptures, and that way you get the whole Bible, you know, if you come on every Sunday. So when Brian said, "Here's the scripture for the lectionary on your Sunday," and I read through Job 38, 1 through 11, and I'm like, whoa. I don't even understand what this is. I can't even understand what is being said here. He says, well, read it some more, and if you decide you want to preach on something else, you go ahead, you have your choice. That's what he calls pulpit freedom. So if he knows me well enough to know that's a challenge. And I wasn't about to let go of this little morsel. So that was months and months and months ago. And in the meanwhile, I kept getting frustrated because there was no sermon there. This is despite the fact that I was on the internet reading all this analysis of Job 38, analysis of the book of Job, you know, just reading. It was really tough. But these months of research apparently have sunk in because I wrote this last night. And I honestly don't feel like I really wrote it. It just sort of came to be. And originally I was going to write it early enough that I would send it to Brian, let him look it over, see if there was anything in the theology that should be corrected or whatever. He didn't get it because I wrote it last night. And if you'll give me a little bit of time, I'll do my best to explain what I've gotten out of this over many months. Megan read it beautifully. Who else, other than our two preachers, understands what Megan read? Okay, I guess that's why I'm here, because we're going to see what Megan did. Oh, by the way, I love this dress. And if you go up to Megan afterwards and you're really nice to her and smile to her, she might show you a little bit of her hot pink crinoline. Really, it's pretty cool. Or maybe now. Yeah. Cool? Why, God? Why did you let this happen? You know everything, past and future. You knew it would happen. Why didn't you prevent this? Prevent my pain, my sorrow. I read a heartbreaking post on Facebook this week. It was from a high school friend in my hometown, and fighting through her grief, she managed to type out a long post. It highlighted her week. The vet discovered that her beloved puppy that she'd been training, after losing her other dog just months ago, had a congenital heart problem, and the pup had gone back to the breeder. A truck blew through an intersection in the middle of rural Montana, where I'm from, fatally hit her brother while riding his prized motorcycle. There were no other vehicles anywhere for miles, and yet somehow they connected. The icing on the cake, she found out about a diagnosis of cervical cancer. That's the one caused by HPV, a preventable virus, if immunization happens before starting sexual activity. So why does God let a child die? Why does God let natural tragedies happen? Today would have been the 71st birthday of my partner of 38 years, who died 2 weeks after finding out that he had acute myeloid leukemia. 2 weeks, gone. Floods, fires, earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanoes. We're reading so much about death in the world news. Why did this saint of a person have to die, we ask? Was Billy Joel right? Well, they showed you a statue, told you to pray. They built you a temple and they locked you away. But they never told you the price that they paid for things that you might have done. Only the good die young. Only the good die young. Couldn't God have prevented that freak accident that took away my friend's precious brother? We comfort our family and friends with loving or philosophical answers. We reassure them that God still cares for us despite the tragedies in our lives. God cannot, or perhaps will not, pre-program the world. We have free choice. We live on a dangerous planet. What kind of a robot world would we live in if everything were controlled, if we were always perfectly protected from harm? Perhaps God could have predetermined for Adam and Eve that they'd never make a bad choice. Ergo, we would never make a bad choice. Our misfortunes, though, are often beyond our control. Our choices don't always cause our heartaches. Why, God? Why did you let this happen? You know everything, past and future. You knew it would happen. We should all be thankful that there's nothing sinful about asking why. Not as long as we keep faith. There's not a thing wrong with screaming at God. You know what? God's heard it all before. God has thick skin. God can take it. In fact, nothing that any of us, not a one of you, could scream or even whisper to God could hurt God more than what Jesus says in Matthew 27:46. Around the 9th hour, Jesus shouted in a loud voice, saying, my God, why have you forsaken me?" In Mark 15:34, and at the 9th hour, Jesus shouted in a loud voice, my God, why have you forsaken me?" It's the only quote repeated in more than one gospel. And Jesus was actually reciting Psalm 22:1. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Why art thou so far from helping me? And the words of my roaring. In all of the eons of time, is there a more devastating plea for a divine justification in the face of suffering? Yet, when we think of posing questions to God about suffering, Jesus isn't the name that comes to mind. That person is Job. Brian joked a little bit about Job and Job, and as I rehearsed this last night and this morning to make sure it would flow off my tongue, because it's God and Job, every once in a while I would say Job and go, stop that. So, since we walked into the story here at the 38th chapter, let me catch you up. It's like if you're coming into season 2 on a Netflix thing and your friend has talked you into watching it, and so we're going to get caught up to the story. So the book of Job opens by introducing us to Job's pristine character. He's blessed, and he lives righteously. Chapter 1, verse 8 describes Job as a perfect and upright man. God praises Job's loyalty. So this prompts an angel to comment. Now it's hinted that the angel's name is Satan. That Job lives this way only because he's under God's protection. Perhaps to prove the angel otherwise, God removes Job's protection. God allows this angel to strip Job of his wealth, of his home. The angel takes away his 10 beautiful children. The angel gets permission to impair Job's health drastically. God allows the angel to throw everything, the worst at Job, but not to take his life. God was proved right. Despite his many challenges, Job does not curse God, although he curses the day he was born. Job anguishes over his troubles, but he never points a finger at God. He never accuses God of being unjust. Job hates his circumstances on earth, but knows it's just God's will. So when Job's three buddies come over to debate the whys of his situation, why, and ask what type of evil Job had committed to deserve his fate, God appears to Job and to his friends out of a whirlwind. That's where we picked up the story. So, how does God answer? Well, here's a little aside. When you see a smarmy politician ignore, redirect, or spin uncomfortable questions, you are seeing the media training they got from their handlers. Now, God is certainly not smarmy. Nevertheless, God does use the classic politician's technique here. God just ignores the questions. Although, in addition, Job has been, if you read the whole book, he's been understandably whining through 30-plus chapters. He now shuts his mouth and he listens. Here's a man who, because of a game God is playing with an angel, quite literally loses everything. Unexpectedly, his life goes from McMansion to squalor. Job famously parks himself on his heap of ashes, and he scrapes the pus out of the boils that cover his body. Job has a right to scream and cry at God. So Job's friends try to convince him, there just has to be something in your past. You must have been the worst kind of sinner, even if you can't remember what you did that was so bad. Sometimes the worst sins, you don't remember them in the morning. Well, these things don't happen to good people, right? Nope. Job isn't going for it. No. He knew in his heart that his life had been faithful to God. He knew he wasn't perfect compared to God, but nothing in his past, nothing at all, came close to justifying this misery. He sincerely claims to be blameless. God doesn't explain anything. There's no revealing to Job that he's a pawn in a challenge to prove to angel Satan that God's disciples are faithful regardless of their circumstance. There's no admission that Job was right all along, that he had done nothing to deserve the extreme treatment he'd endured. So after we've read Job's complaints, doubts, and questions for 30-plus chapters, Job doesn't get the truth. He doesn't get any theology or philosophy of life or the answer from God that anyone would be expecting. God reminds Job that compared to God, we're like inexperienced children. Why don't we take your kids to R-rated movies? No. You know, especially young kids, they're just not ready to wrap their minds around death. They don't get death. I mean, who does? But they don't get the concepts of sex yet. They don't get any clear distinction between real and fantasy. In adults, that's mental illness. But in children, it's just the norm. So exhausted parents of toddlers will state they could live the rest of their lives and never again hear the word why. Research tells us on average children, toddler age, ask questions 73 times a day. Why do people die? Where did I come from? What's God? How was I made? What does we can't afford it mean? Is Santa real? Why do I have to go to school? When you die, who will I live with? Why is the sky blue? Why can't I stay up as late as you can? All all-impressive questions, but a toddler simply isn't ready for the real, in-depth answers to any of those questions. Often, parents divert the child with other interesting information only a little related to the question. So, when Job asks a question that God doesn't think he's ready for, instead of an answer, there's a diversion, spinning the question to a celebration of God's clever accomplishment, creating the world. So, God mentions frolicking whales, powerful hippos, storks that treat their young in odd ways. Now, Job had asked why evil exists, and God takes Job to the metaphorical zoo. Our passage today is just the beginning of God spinning the question and explaining a bigger picture. God replies in the last 4 chapters, and God goes on, like Carl Sagan or Neil deGrasse Tyson or an episode of PBS Blue Planet. We hear about the dimensions of outer space. We hear about how deep the ocean, the shape of the earth, the power of the weather, the beauty of the constellations. God is a proud creator. God doesn't want us to forget that each animal that God created is unique and special. And if you read through the book of Job, you will hear about all the animals. Oxen are strong, ostriches are fast, lions are cunning, deer and mountain goats are charming, wild donkeys are giddy but brawny. Don't forget about how powerful the neck of a horse is. Be in awe of the soaring eagles and hawks. Check out the muscle structure on that hippo. Or some scholars say it was an elephant, but watch whales while they spout and play. Now, considering Job asked about evil, this answer is not what he expected. This answer is bizarre. So, like a politician, God has cleverly reframed the issue. God isn't hiding. God acknowledges that Job will have questions, but God expands the question from the specifics of Job and the question of evil. God reminds Job that God is all-powerful. God puts Job and all of us mortals in our place, like children, too young to understand. Hey kids, good that you're curious, but maybe when you're older. God has an explanation, but we're not ready for it yet. Not in this earth. If we can't bear these tragedies, how can we bear the reason for these tragedies? God has a plan. God can clearly see a bigger picture, a bigger vision, impossible for us to envision from our vantage point. Like Job, we must trust God because God made everything and controls everything that we're worrying about. God works in God's time, not our time. We learn in the next 4 chapters that God cares deeply for this creation. Our physical world is important to God, whether flora or fauna, the celestial bodies, the oceans and their secrets, flying, crawling, galloping, wallowing, swimming, jumping, slithering, sliding, gliding, wiggling, hovering, burrowing, soaring, creeping, hopping, running, climbing. God's proud of creation. We cannot begin to understand its interworkings. Humans will never know all of the answers. We don't even know the right questions to ask. Luckily, we believe in a God, a creator, who does know all the answers and knows that, like toddlers, we are not ready for the answer to every query. We must depend on our faith in God, like Job.